Welcome. I'm Karen Field Bullock, and this is lesson number 11 in my course, A Spiritual Path to True Love. In today's lesson, I'm going to talk about growth and attractiveness. So let me start by talking about different types of growth. There are many ways to talk about types of growth, so I'm going to present growth in the ways I think about it. According to some people in the business world, personal growth basically refers to an individual's development as a person, presumably in terms of self-confidence and maturity, through the accomplishment of career goals. While I like the emphasis on character development and think it's appropriate for the business world, I notice that it describes a result more than a process. I prefer to define personal growth more broadly in terms of process. I see it as the process of becoming more of who you are inside, experiencing more of your full potential as a human being, within and outside your career. This includes gaining self-confidence and maturity, but it also includes choices made and consequences endured, good and bad, because even bad choices that don't immediately lead to maturity are part of the larger growth process. For instance, getting fired from a job for being incompetent can just as well lead the person to grow if the person is ready to learn from the harsh consequences of his or her actions. People in the United States often repeat the advice that you can be whatever you want to be, or as William Arthur Ward said, if you can dream it, you can become it. These sayings can be inspiring to many people, so I wouldn't say they're wrong. But I have noticed that people can dream some pretty ambitious dreams that never come to fruition. I believe you'll never be what you want to be until what you want to be is you, at least in potential. Maybe the hidden loophole in these sayings is that you can be whatever you deeply want to be, because what all people deeply want to be is the highest version of themselves. As for the idea that if you can dream it, you can become it, this is true for any given lifetime if your dreams are in alignment with your potential and soul's purpose. I could dream about being an Olympic gymnast, but I'm not equipped to be one, and trying to do so would take me away from my spiritual purposes. As I've mentioned before, a basic principle of growth is that if you plant an acorn, it will never ever grow into a willow or an elm tree, even if it wanted to. Even if it drew up a dream board and applied the law of attraction and meditated and prayed for it for the rest of its life, an acorn can only grow into an oak tree or else not grow. Similarly, you were born into a certain body with a certain kind of mind and certain set of traits and talents. Although being you includes following your interests and growing toward whatever you want to become next, you can only succeed within the limits of your genetic inheritance, your environmental influences and opportunities, the strength of your will, your soul's purposes, and your quantum connectedness. Psychologist and author Abraham Maslow described personal growth in terms of stages of self-actualization. Author Rydall calls it emerging. These thinkers assume, though, that people only want to grow in positive directions. It makes sense. Few people would advise others to grow in negative directions. But when I look at the people around me and I look within myself and my own growth process, I see something different than the enlightened process of self-actualizing or emerging into one's highest self that these systems describe. What I see is that whether we like it or not, personal growth involves recognizing all your potentials, positive and negative, and then making choices as you go along about which ways to explore and which growth opportunities to abandon or reject up front. For example, as human beings, we all have the potential for committing murder. While we might all have daydreams about killing someone at some point in our lives, few of us would choose to grow into our full potential as murderers. That's why I make a distinction between the term personal growth, which I believe is exploring all that you can be, and spiritual growth. Spiritual growth happens in tandem with personal growth, but only for people who are ready and willing to grow spiritually. It involves choosing to grow in alignment with the spirit of compassion toward others, while choosing not to grow into one's antisocial or other negative potentials. People who have no real sense of goodness, other than what appears to be good for themselves at the moment, are not equipped to grow spiritually, except through life events and the consequences of their actions, and across lifetimes. Personal growth is available to all of us throughout life on earth, whereas spiritual growth is only for those of us who are ready for it, and only to the extent that we're ready for it. Those who totally lack a moral compass are not yet equipped to filter out their growth opportunities according to higher principles. It's important to realize that the beginning stages of personal growth, however ugly they may be to us, to the rest of us, are essential for new souls to progress through so that they can evolve further. And in some distant past lifetime, we've all been there. The difference between personal growth and spiritual growth is that people who have some awareness of spiritual reality make choices to align their actions and words with a more elevated understanding of goodness, more universal compassion, and a higher ethical standard than their own narrow self-interest. They may or may not believe in a deity or deities, or in a godlike concept such as providence or the force. And they may or may not have an answer to the ultimate question of why we're here. But they generally have a sense that we are all human beings, we are all one, and that universal love is a higher cause than self-indulgence. They may not know what karma is or believe in it, but they do feel that the mystical concept, what goes around comes around, somehow rings true. Although we all have abundant chances for personal growth throughout life, there are at least two ways that personal growth can be blocked or stunted. One is harsh circumstances, especially those that cause trauma and post-traumatic stress. Traumatized children, for instance, have a hard time maturing normally and often don't. The other block to personal growth is a willful refusal to grow, like Peter Pan. Although most kids do want to grow up, most of us as adults have limits in how much we want to continue growing. That's because growing takes a lot of hard work, and it can be exhausting to grow all the time. It's also not easy on the ego, because first you have to admit to yourself that you still need to grow, and then you have to stretch and be willing to make mistakes and possibly be made fun of as you try to grow. Still, whether they see the light or feel the heat, adults do sometimes choose to grow. While some people are excited about growing, most of us feel best about ourselves after we've grown, not while we're doing the hard work of growing. For instance, learning to read can be frustrating and hard for little kids. Some kids just don't want to read, and they struggle with parents and teachers that try to make them. Early readers need a lot of encouragement, help, and the right kind of discipline from parents and teachers, at least until they start to get better at it. And think about high school sports. Sports training can be grueling at times, but when disciplined training turns into team wins, the team takes pride in its collective growth, pride that redounds to every team member and even to family and fans. The process of growing is rarely easy, but the sense of pride in having grown and the afterglow of personal fulfillment definitely make people more attractive. Both building your muscles and mastering your reading skills are examples of expansive growth, expanding your physical strength and expanding your thinking skills. But there's another kind of personal growth, one that's even less popular than the daily grind of practice and learning and skill building, because it's even harder on the ego. I call it corrective growth. Corrective growth happens when you grow in the wrong direction and then you receive critical feedback a rejection or a rebuke, and then choose to unlearn your mistaken thinking or bad behavior. For example, kids that learn to steal need to be caught and taught why it's not good behavior, either legally or morally. Kids who are less spiritually evolved, though, will respond better to the legal argument than to the moral argument because they can relate to it better. Or if a kid does really well in school and then starts to get delusional about his or her greatness, that kid needs to be challenged and brought back to reality. Corrective growth is a major endeavor for people in psychotherapy because people seeking help often arrive with mistaken notions about themselves and the world around them. But most people who never go through therapy still harbor mistaken notions that need to be corrected, mostly by parents, relatives, friends, or frenemies, from egotism to self-loathing to mild paranoia. In romantic relationships, when one partner needs corrective growth and the other partner, out of love, decides to try to set him or her straight, things can get dicey. Unless the criticized partner is fairly confident and growth-oriented, he or she may feel more unloved than grateful for the tip. So, as an evolved person, the more you embrace growth as the best way to handle your challenges, the more you'll be able to feel grateful instead of resentful about those tips when you receive them. Rather than being expansive, corrective growth involves a process of shrinking the person's sense of entitlement or overblown ego, foolhardiness, sanctimoniousness, or overwhelm at someone else's perceived greatness compared to theirs. Though that part of the person shrinks, the person grows in his or her grasp of reality. But criticism needs to be offered carefully, of course. To keep a relationship stable, psychologist and author John Gottman recommends a ratio of 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, such as a criticism. The Toastmasters organization, a public speaking organization, teaches its members formal ways to offer feedback to other speakers. One of their recommendations is to use what they call the sandwich principle. That is, begin by complimenting the person for all the things they've done right. That's the bottom layer of bread. Then the meat in the middle is your constructive criticism, stated as positively as possible so that it doesn't leave a bad aftertaste. Finally, offer encouragement following your critique as the top layer of bread to help make your sandwich digestible. Unfortunately for society and for many couples, some people tend to reject any corrective feedback and choose to continue growing in ways that are off base, selfish, or even criminal. These people are, however, experiencing personal growth by exploring their personal capacities according to their free will, whereas people who are more evolved have already explored and grown past these particular points of growth in previous lifetimes. Gradually, as we gain experience through more and more lifetimes, we all learn spiritual principles through the challenges and consequences we face. The main thing to remember is that in our universe, growth happens in its own ways, not just socially acceptable or spiritually enlightened ways. I'm not suggesting that we accept moral relativism in place of rule of law. Some behavior should be punished. It's important to call out harmful and illegal behavior, but it's equally important not to condemn the person who committed these actions. They are still people, and condemnation is not just unloving, it's also dehumanizing. The spiritual path of love calls us to have compassion for everyone, and restorative justice follows that path better than the blame and shame justice system does. You don't have to give people a pass for bad behavior in order to understand, appreciate, and respect the fact that in many cases they may not be as evolved as you are. By recognizing the fundamental goodness of every human being, despite their mistakes and even their crimes, and by judging the behavior but not the person. It will make you less self-righteous, less intolerant, and less judgmental. That shift in your attitude will help you evolve into a more loving person. This principle applies doubly in romantic love relationships, where well-meaning attempts at corrective growth interventions can trounce egos. Judging or condemning your partner because of mistakes made, lines crossed, or anger hurtfully expressed will not help you heal yourselves or the relationship. Healing can begin once you both recognize that perhaps despite appearances, you and your partner are fundamentally good people who just want to be loved and who are trying your best to love each other, but who may have different ideas of love and of how to balance self-love with loving each other and all the other factors that need to be factored in. You may decide that your original perception of profound goodness in your partner was something of an illusion. Yet, with so many different types and expressions of love to choose from, you can always find a way to step back, perceive something good about your partner, and thereby love your partner in some respects, even if it's back to square one, compassion. The way I like to talk about the mingling of personal growth and spiritual growth is by way of the famous movie, The Wizard of Oz. In my interpretation of that story, Dorothy had a strong will and idealistic principles, so you could say she was the backbone of the group. She had a clear goal, but needed more character traits to accomplish it. So she picked up the Scarecrow, representing intelligence or brains, the Tin Man representing love or heart, and the Cowardly Lion representing courage or guts, or as he called it, nerve. It's important to realize that at the time Dorothy picked up her traveling companions, these character traits were undeveloped. It was only through undergoing the difficult challenges of getting to Oz and then capturing the Wicked Witch's broomstick and bringing it back to the wizard that they developed their respective strengths of character. Then there was Toto, Dorothy's dog, who I think represents intuition. As only intuition can do, Toto jumped unexpectedly and led Dorothy in a new direction, saving her from potentially disastrous hot air balloon ride with the incompetent wizard. And like intuition, Toto's sudden move positioned Dorothy to learn exactly what she needed to know from Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, that she already had the power to return home using her ruby slippers. The very beautiful Glinda represented love, spiritual wisdom, and great power used in the service of the higher good. The very ugly Wicked Witch of the West represented great power used in the service of the lower emotions, from hatred and contempt to fearfulness, jealousy, revenge, torture, and the selfish domination of others. The point here is that spiritual growth comes through difficult challenges that involve confronting and processing, or you could say melting, our lower emotions. When such emotions dominate our lives, they make us ugly. By contrast, the person who uses love and positive growth to handle those life challenges, strengthening their basic character traits and following their intuition, can eventually access the true love and spiritual wisdom required to achieve their highest goals. And along with that level of growth comes tremendous pride, a sense of fulfillment, and great attractiveness. So that's my lesson for today. I hope you'll join me again next time, when I'll have much more to say about attractiveness and particular ways to grow that can make you more attractive in love relationships. In the meantime, I've listed a few resources below for those of you interested in learning more. Bye for now.